So good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. So on behalf of Dr. Tara Laval and myself, Channing Tate, we'd like to welcome you to this year's Career Development Public Speaking Workshop panel. So just as a reminder, SMDM has 5 presentations or 5 workshops that they're live streaming, and we're very honored that this is one of the workshops that will be live streamed and recorded. Also want to let you know that all the materials that you're going to see today will be available for download at some point. I don't know that they're up just yet, but they will be up and made available. So the format of today's workshop is going to be, we'll have 3 presenters, our esteemed panel here. We'll give presentations about 8 to 10 minutes each. And then after all 3 of them speak, we will have a question and answer session for you. And you'll see the mic set up here like most of the sessions here. So at this time, I would like to introduce our panelists. So first we have Dr. Devine Wright in the middle here. And Dr. Wright is an assistant professor at the Department of Population Medicine at the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Institute and the Harvard Medical School. Her research aims to improve the supply and demand of efficient healthcare that can improve the management of pediatric chronic diseases. In her work, she utilizes conjoint analysis, economic evaluation, simulation modeling, and health services research methods. Our second speaker will be Dr. Laura Shearer, sitting right here. And Dr. Shearer is an assistant professor at the University of Colorado, Denver in the Department of Medicine. Her research seeks to understand how people form health-related preferences, how people decide to seek health care or not, and how they engage in shared decision-making. And lastly, but definitely not least, we have Dr. Ankur Pandya, who is an assistant professor of health decision science at the Department of Health Policy and Management at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. His areas of interest include applied decision science studies, connecting cost-effectiveness analysis with value-based health policies, and methodological topics within disease simulation modeling. So, with that brief introduction, we're going to go ahead and get started with Dr. Wright's presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to give you a quick preview. So thanks, Channing, Tara, Logan, and the entire Career Development Committee for pulling this all together. And let's get started. So I'm going to call this, so to speak, out-of-the-box public speaking for scientists. My name is Devine Wright, and you can tweet this at Wright Censored. So I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. And we decided when we were planning this panel to start by talking about our personal public speaking story. And so this is my story, which starts in 1997 or 1998. And if you were a teenage girl in America, then this time you may notice that this is YM Magazine. That's what we called Instagram in 1998. And I distinctly remember reading this issue. I will say it's really interesting how accurate some of this stuff is. Like, yes, I am a stress mess. That's still true. But I paid more attention to this article, which is about owning that party scene. So I was a shy kid, like stand behind your mom's skirt, at a party shy. And this article sort of talked about how to manage being a shy person when you're in social situations. And I remembered it talked about how if you're shy, if you're a wallflower, then the solution is to actually approach someone else who looks really shy, right? You've got one up on them because you walked up to them and ask them questions and pretend you were popular. And so that was my first exposure to fake it till you make it, right? Like just like push through. And I think that was actually really helpful. And I said, if I ever get invited to a party, I'm gonna try that trick. And we won't talk about how long that took for me to implement this plan. However, I think it's something that has been part of my public speaking story since then. And I think that actually feels bad, right? I think you should be able to be yourself as a public speaker and anywhere. And it feels wrong to say that you can't be yourself. But I also think, if you're thinking pragmatically, public speaking is a reality of our job. And if you don't like public speaking, then you may want to get a different job, right? If you're in academia, in order to get promoted, you need to have invited talks, you need to speak at conferences, and it's just you have to get through it, you have to do it. So we want to talk today about how to help you do that a little bit better. So one solution is potentially, like YM suggested, to create a confident alter ego. And I love this quote from Mindy Kaling, where she was facing a difficult situation in her show, and she said, "You aren't Mindy, you're a warrior, and your warrior name is the two things you love most, Beyonce Pad Thai." And I think this is similar to power posing, right? Or you can create your own public speaking persona, someone who's really confident, someone who's not scared. You can come up with whatever name you want it to be, and that person is a really excellent public speaker. And that person, it's kind of like being an actor is the way I think about this. This is a performance. And a lot of these things, the jokes, what we say, they're all choreographed. And I think if you think about it that way, if you're really, really nervous, that's one way that you can sort of get through this. Next, I think it's really, really important to engage with your audience. And what does that mean? So previously to moving to Boston, I was in a school of medicine in the Department of Pediatrics for many years. And so I had to give many talks to physicians. And when I start talks with physicians, I like to start with this slide where I show this textbook from 1992 and talk about health economics, because people always say she's an economist, even though, well, we'll see. But it says to be trained in medicine and then be faced with some hard-nosed, cold-blooded economists placing dollar values on human life and suffering is anathema to many. So I present this slide because they don't want to see me there. They're like, what are you doing in this room trying to tell me how to do my job, right? And then I just go for it, right? I'm like, yep, that's me. The hard-nosed, cold-blooded economist. And I'm just like Scrooge McDuck, and I'm stealing your money and trying to ruin your healthcare. And I think this is actually a negotiation strategy. When you're negotiating or you're working with a party and they're really nervous and you think there's going to be some tension, just put it on the table first to say, I know you're really nervous that I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And I think once you say that, they're like, yeah, that's right. And you can't just stop there and say, yes, I am here to steal your money. You have to then explain, this is not really the situation. Here's where I'm coming from. Here's my motivation. Here's what I need. And so then I show this slide and I say, I don't actually think of myself as a health economist. I'm a decision scientist. And decision sciences is the study of how stakeholders, whether they be patients, healthcare providers, or healthcare payers, make decisions about the use and allocation of healthcare resources under conditions of uncertainty, complexity, and competing values, right? I define myself, and I say, this is the lens that I'm bringing to this talk. I also think that storytelling classes can be really important, and so Tara Lavelle once got me a gift certificate to take a storytelling class at a place called Story District in DC. It's DC's version of The Moth, and I got the opportunity to audition for a storytelling show and to work with a storytelling coach about crafting my story, and this was a really, really valuable experience. They taught me about giving space for your jokes to land, right? Like, don't just keep moving on. You have to give people time to laugh. I think there's something about what I think I call like the Mr. Rogers effect, or like Obama does this really well, where you're just trying to convey empathy and get down on the level of the people of the room that you're in. And the sort of, I don't know if you've ever seen the episode of West Wing where they're debating about whether Jed Bartlett in the town hall should take his jacket off or not. Will that connect with his audience, right? Where's the moment where you're going to roll up your sleeves? And I think it's interesting, you know, we've seen a lot of talks over the past few days, and some people start and they say, you know, just a random example, disease X is really burdensome. And has led to really high costs and mortality. And there's a difference between saying that without any emotion and saying, which is a statement that I use, type 1 diabetes has a massive impact on the lives of adolescents, and these kids are having a really, really hard time, right? Those are different statements. One has no emotion in it, and one you're kind of like, oh my God, I feel bad, what's going on with these kids? And I think if we can incorporate that into some of our speaking, especially when you're talking to providers or you're talking to patients, it's really helpful to engage with the audience. I've also told stories at the Moth. This is very terrifying, but I think it's really valuable. And I would encourage you, when you think about public speaking, not to think about academic settings, but to watch people just generally tell stories, watch stand-up comics, watch people who do improv, watch the way in which they connect with the audience, listen to their cadence, listen to the specific word choices they make. And a story, I think, is, you know, think about this as a story, and a story is not just an anecdote, or it's not just presenting facts. A story takes you on a journey. A story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but by the end of that story, you should see the world differently. or you should have changed, or something should have changed, right? And you want to take people along that journey, because otherwise you're just here talking about facts, and that's not as interesting, I think. And the last thing, or the second to last thing I'll say is that appearances really matter. As a woman of color, it really frustrates me when people put pictures in their slides and they're not really diverse. I think that the pictures that we put in our slides should represent the populations that we're talking about. If you're talking about research in Africa, I hope you don't just have pictures of people from West Africa, right? Africa is a very diverse place. And I think it's really important also to have pictures of people engaging in activities that defy some of their stereotypes, people with disabilities engaging in physical activity, and this woman is in a race, having a picture of a black woman coding. I think that's really important. If you want sources for things like this, there are a lot of places online where you can get open source free images like Pexels, Unsplash, and Pixabay. And then lastly, I think if you want to become a better public speaking, the most painful thing I've ever done was to record myself and to videotape yourself. And so this was an exercise that I actually did when I was starting at my job at the University of Washington. We had what I called Professor Camp, and they made us all give a 5-minute lecture on any topic. They recorded us, and then we all watched that video together. And then everyone critiqued each other. They were very kind and allowed you to watch the video and critique yourself first, and find some of the flaws, and then everyone else came for you, which was less than fun, but I think there's nothing like watching yourself on video. I know it's really painful to listen to your own voice. It doesn't sound the same way out loud that it sounds in your head, but you can identify all of your tics, all of your filler words. You can find those weird physical things that you're doing. Watching yourself on video really highlights the fact that you may be talking too fast. It is a very painful and a very valuable exercise, and I think if you're really serious for an important talk, you should practice it in front of other people and ask some of the people you're practicing in front of to record you and watch that later. So I'm going to stop there. I know my other panel presenters have very valuable things to say, but thank you for your time.
All right. Daveen, that was awesome. And I feel slightly nervous today. I have to admit, this is speaking about public speaking. It's like a meta talk. This is like maybe one of the highest pressure things that I've done. You guys agree? Yeah, okay. All right, so this better be good. So I am, like Daveen, a natural introvert. I think we both described ourselves similarly when we were planning this together. We described ourselves similarly in terms of, just how we think about ourselves and our personality, what we had to overcome in order to, be comfortable on stage and give good talks. So when I was thinking about my personal experiences and the way I think about myself as a public speaker, there are these two events that stand out in my mind that are sort of definitional of me and my public speaking capabilities. And so I'm going to tell you those two stories today. And so my talk is essentially represented on this timeline. So I was a classic shy kid, just for some background. I am still to this day really easily overwhelmed by large numbers of people. I didn't, when I was a kid, like to be noticed. Eyes on me were just always terrifying. I never spoke in class, right? Never spoke publicly. And there was this moment in the 6th grade, I think it was about halfway through the year, and I have no idea what precipitated this, but this kid who was sitting in front of me turned around and he said, "Can you even talk?" Like in this really mean voice that just rings in my head for my whole life. I'm never going to forget him saying, "Can you even talk?" And he was mad at me, and I was horrified because he was paying attention to me, noticing me for this thing that, was really hard for me at the time. So with that background in mind, I'll just tell you quickly this story of my very first science presentation, which was me in the 5th grade giving my 5th grade science project. So I'll set the scene for you guys. The scene is the library in a public elementary school. All of us little kids were sitting around cross-legged, and each one of us were getting up and talking about our little science projects. And the whole time I'm sitting there while everybody else is giving their talk, and I'm just thinking, how can I get out of this? This is just awful. Maybe I can make myself puke, and then I'll have to go to the nurse's office, or I'll pretend to pass out or something. I was just trying to get out of this horrible situation. And it wasn't that I was underprepared, it was just that I was terrified of people looking at me. And I think that a lot of people have public speaking anxiety, right? But some of us are a little bit more off the charts than others. So in any case, I go to give my little presentation, and I completely freeze. I can't utter a word. I end up just being sort of pulled aside by my teacher, having not given any kind of presentation at all. And I decided after that day that I would never speak in front of people again. You can tell that I'm not very good at keeping promises to myself. So fast forward 15 years to my first talk in graduate school. So, most of you are in graduate school, or you've been in graduate school, and you may know that for a lot of graduate programs, you have to give a talk at the end of your first year. And this was just absolutely terrifying for me, this idea that I had to give a whole 30-minute talk about my research. But it's something that I had to do. So I'll just set the scene again. Here's the beautiful psychology department at Washington University where I went to graduate school, and this little bump out here on the first floor is where I gave my very first science talk in graduate school. And since then, I had given some talks, and talked to classes, and I did learn to speak up in class a little bit. That's how I got to graduate school, right? But I had never given a full presentation, and it terrified me just as much as it did way back in the 5th grade. Like, nothing had changed whatsoever, except that now I've got this hefty dose of imposter syndrome. I'm not good enough, right? I don't belong here. I'm not smart enough. I'm going to be exposed by this talk that I give. Okay, so now you guys are realizing, how clinical I am. In any case, so then I just remember having, as I was preparing for this talk that I knew I was going to have to give, I just remember, I don't know what precipitated it, I had this feeling, and the feeling is very well embodied by this cartoon guy right here, and just, I was thinking, wait a minute, hold on a second. My job actually here is very simple. I've been working on this research for a whole year, and I actually think that it's pretty interesting. So all I really need to do here is stand up in front of some people for half an hour. I tell them what I did in a way that they can understand, and I tell them why I think it's interesting. So I'm going to drop all the baggage of having to convince anybody else that it's interesting. I'm just going to tell them why I myself think that this thing is interesting. And that's it. And I'm not going to strive for anything higher than that. I'm going to say what I did. I'm going to say why I think it's interesting. And everybody's afraid of criticism, right? We're always afraid of this audience is, thinking critically about us. But the thing about this particular talk and many of the ones after that is that I think about the flaws in my research a lot. So when I'm presenting my research, I kind of have this in the back of my head. And instead of thinking about this as a weakness, oh my God, somebody's going to notice the flaws in my research. In fact, I can anticipate just about any criticism that a person has of my research. So if somebody comes up to my critical, I can say, yeah, we thought about that, and we're planning the next study. Or, yeah, I thought about that, and this is why we decided to design the study this way and not that way, to do this and, not that. So knowing and thinking about the flaws of your study isn't, something to defend, it's something to embrace. And also, there are people who say rude things, and that really says more about the commenter than about you as a speaker, and this was my mind shift. It says more about them than about me. Okay, and now here's the final piece, and this was the critical piece of the puzzle that came together for me before this talk. I had heard somewhere that people memorize their talks word for word. And I didn't realize that this is something that academics do, and this echoes what Devine said. I practiced the heck out of that talk so that I knew every word I was going to say for every single slide. I knew the cadence at which I was going to say it. I knew exactly how this was going to go. And yes, I was completely hoarse by the time, from talking to myself in my office for the whole week prior to my talk. I was completely hoarse giving that talk. But it was okay because I knew every single word I was going to say. And we sort of had this idea that academics, the words just flow perfectly all the time because what we're seeing in a talk is a reflection of their genius. But oftentimes these talks are just really very well prepared. And so I did that. So my internal state was the same. I was super anxious when I went to give this graduate student presentation, but my external reality was a lot cooler. And I attribute that in part because I had learned as being a social psychology graduate student about the illusion of transparency. And this is the idea that people can't tell how anxious you are on the inside, that it's way more available to you than it is to other people. And this helps when you're anxious with public speaking, because sometimes that anxiety can snowball out of control. At first, you are really anxious about the talk and being in front of people, and then you're anxious about people perceiving that you're anxious. And then it's like meta-anxiety, and it's all over from there. So I'd learned about the illusion of transparency, and that really helped. So what was the aftermath? I thought I had done a pretty good job, but then my advisor came up to me afterwards, and he said, Laura, that was hands down the best first-year presentation that I've ever seen. Wonderful, wonderful feedback, right? So completely the opposite. I had learned that I was capable of doing this and doing it well. That doesn't mean every talk that I give is good. It just means that I got this really great feedback at this critical point in my career. Okay, so what about now? So my first talk at SEM was later, and I credit the society with a lot of the public speaking experience that I have had in my life and being able to hone the skill to the extent that I have it. SMDM gives junior people so many opportunities for speaking. It's a really wonderful thing. So I love this society because of the way that they've helped me continue to hone my public speaking skills. Okay, so what about today? I just want to give you a few extra thoughts. My talks now, I still get nervous. Maybe you could tell, maybe you can't. I try to reframe it as excitement, but that doesn't always work. So sometimes it's just nerves. I still practice. I sometimes practice my talks a lot. I still get feedback because it's hard for me to tell when I'm over-explaining or under-explaining, so feedback is always really important, and especially important for those bigger talks that you give, like your job talks. I try to take on the attitude for every talk that I'm not trying to be brilliant, right? I'm not trying to convey my brilliance. I'm just trying to be honest and to be open about what I think about my work. I'm trying to convey what I think why I think the topic is interesting and important. I missed the word that I was really looking for. I'm just trying to be authentic. So instead of being brilliant, I'm just trying to be authentic. I'm trying to convey why I think results are cool, or why they're disappointing or frustrating, which often happens too in my research. I don't always want to try to sell things. Sometimes I'm disappointed, and I'm ready for critiques when I have them, when they're confronted. I'm ready for critiques because I have them myself, so I'm thinking about them a lot. Just a couple of other things. The dreaded Q&A. The Q&A is an opportunity, and that's how I try to frame it all the time. It's an opportunity to engage an interested person, somebody standing up on a mic and speaking publicly. So, they are taking a risk to talk to you, so they must be interested. It's an opportunity to get ideas for your future work. It's an opportunity to identify critiques of your work that come to mind for a lot of people. And it's an opportunity to learn about new literature. Okay, and don't be afraid to say, I don't know, or can you repeat that? And Channing is telling me time, but I really just have one more minute of things to say, so I apologize. This is like I'm breaking one of my own rules to stay on time. Okay, it gets easier. You will make mistakes, but that's okay because you'll give lots of talks and the mistakes won't matter as much over time. The audience wants you to give a good talk. So they're your friends, they're not your enemies. They're not geniuses, so you have to walk them through things slowly. They're listening to a person speaking, so you have to walk them through what you did pretty slowly. Take comfort in the illusion of transparency. Tell stories when you have them, but if you don't have a story, that's okay. You don't have to tell a story for every talk. Use pictures as much as you can, but sometimes people use pictures inappropriately and leave people wondering why on earth there's a picture of a rabbit with a pancake on its head on your slides. So only use pictures if they're really relevant. Okay, that's all I've got.
So as I pull up my slides, let me say I agree. Oh no, the jokes. I agree with everything that Davina and Laura said. The difference, one difference is for those people who know me, I'm a severe extrovert. But I will tell you that, at least for me, we also get nervous and anxious before talks. I get nervous and anxious before every talk, and the way it kind of plays out usually is somewhere 24 hours, 6 hours before the talk, my stomach gets really tight, my shoulders get really tight, I get gassy, and Like then closer to the talk, my hands start to shake and my feet start to shake, and I can feel myself panicking. And I'm not a doctor or a biology person. I think this is like fight or flight responses. It might not be. I don't care. Like I feel it though. And the first few times it happened, I started panicking that I was panicking. And so it was a feedback loop, and it was just not helpful. I've been giving academic talks for 10 years, and the fact that it keeps happening is actually weirdly comforting to me, because now when it happens, I'm like, oh, there it is. Here, I expected that. And then you start to recognize it. That's important. And then the magic trick I try to do, this gets to something that Laura said, I try to take that nervous energy and convert it into enthusiasm and passion and showing the audience that I care about something and hoping that maybe that can be infectious and maybe they might care about the same things that I care about when I'm done. And it can be like a very profound like problem that I'm working on, like that's going to affect lots of people. Or I put this picture of Milt Weinstein up here because it could also be about methods. If something's geeking you out, that's great. Show that to everyone else. Milt is great about it. He geeks out on logic and trees and like kind of inherently boring topics, but he believes in the logic so much, and it's so important to him that it starts to become important to people in the room. Something that I try to tell myself, like the moments before the talk, right? The worst part of public speaking is like right before. I try to tell myself, I'm nervous because I care. If I didn't care about what I was about to do, I wouldn't be nervous. But caring about the talk is a good thing, right? So these nerves also kind of indicate that you care. This is good, and then you want to like translate that. Okay, something else that helps me, okay, it has to do with this movie. The Edge of Tomorrow, I think is what it's called. And if you haven't seen it, just give me 35 minutes to explain the plot. It's a movie that's set in the future, and these aggressive and sophisticated aliens have invaded Earth, and they're winning, and they're doing a good job. And the humans are trying to launch like a counterattack. And Tom Cruise is one of the human soldiers, and the movie sets up that he's like not a good soldier, he's like below average. Okay, so the humans are going to attack the aliens. They do this like beach landing, like a D-Day styled like landing. Tom Cruise lands on the beach, and within 1 second, he's killed by the aliens. It's very chaotic, and he's killed. And then he wakes up, and it's the morning of the invasion again, and everything's happening in that day the same way it did the day before. He's like, what? And they get in the helicopter, and he lands on the beach, and he remembers where he was killed before, so he steps out of the way, and he didn't get killed. But then he's killed by something else. And he wakes up, and it's the morning again. And this repeats hundreds of times. This is like the sci-fi plot in the movie. So the lesson here for public speaking is that imagine if you knew where the death traps are going to be in your talk. So if you have a really important talk, let's say a job talk at your dream institution, it should not be the first time you're giving that talk, if you can plan it to the extent that you can control it. I like to give talks multiple times because then I can work out the kinks. So I give the talks to my friends internally, I do internal seminars, and then I like to go outside where people are going to, I like to know where where are the tough questions going to come, what worked, what didn't work, where are the beats, where do I pause for emphasis, where are the jokes. It takes me 3 to 5 times to learn this, and then by the time I get to that job talk in my dream institution, I'm Tom Cruise, I've done this 100 times, like, they're like, wow, how does he know where he's an amazing soldier now. That's like, spoiler alert. All right, so now I'll do 3 practical tips, and then I'm done. The first one is, did you know you can hyperlink in your slides in PowerPoint to backup slides? And I'll show you how it works in like my kind of preferred template here. So what I like to do with my slides, you don't have to do this, but I like to do this. The title of my slides is always a sentence, a declarative sentence. And it's like a topic sentence for a paragraph. It just tells the audience the main point of the slide in 1 sentence. So if they're tuning out, if they look up, statins reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. That's all I want to tell them. And then I'll have an image to support. In this case, it's a New York Times article. And then if there is like the cardiovascular, like the cardiology like person in the front row who doesn't believe me and asks a question during like a longer seminar with a back and forth, I can click on my button there and it takes me to the data. And I can show them the data. This is how I used to start slides. I used to do a lot of data in the background, a lot of graphs. 2 problems with that. First, you can run out of time before you get to your results, which is the whole point of why you're there. That's why I like can we all agree statins reduce the risk of Great, we can move on. And if we don't, then we can get into this. And so this was a crutch. Like I used to want to show all the data to show them I knew it. I know the data, I know the field, I have it, but just keep it in the background. You can still have it, but don't waste your time. I also believe that as like a person who sits through talks, I have a certain amount of bandwidth that I can look at graphs and data, and then I run out and I get tired. And so for people like that, use that energy on your results, not someone else's results, unless it's totally important to your idea. You have to show these background graphs. Okay, that's tip one. Tip two, like Daveen said, sometimes you're going to present to a crowd who doesn't do what you do, methods-wise. So be prepared to do some quick teaching, and I'll show you what I use for micro-simulation models, which we kind of do in our half of MDM. So if I'm presenting to like a clinical department that doesn't know modeling, I'll say, these disease models, they're like patients, hypothetical patients can exist in these mutually exclusive and collectively exhausted health states. This is the simplest model where patients can either be alive or dead. And I'm showing you this slide so I can show you this slide, which shows you how microsimulation models work. I got 14 people back there, and I'm simulating them through one by one, and there's some probability that they live or die through this simple live-die model over 3 years. So now, they can kind of see how a microsimulation model works. I'm not just showing them, or I'm just telling them I'm showing them. I show them that slide so I can show them this slide. So let's say I'm evaluating 8 different screening policies. Each one of these screens in different colors, a different kind of screening policy. What I'm doing in my analysis is I'm taking the same exact population, running them through the same exact model structure, and the only thing I'm changing is the intervention strategies. And that's why different things are happening to these people. I always show this slide twice because it took a long time to make. The model is like calculating their lifetime qualities and their lifetime costs, and those numbers that the model's spitting back, that's what I'm going to use in my cost effectiveness analysis, where the whole thing ends up. This is 2 minutes or less of teaching the entire field, really crudely, but it also shows the strength of our approach, right? Which is to say, the only difference across these strategies are the strategies themselves. It's a perfect counterfactual. So I'm teaching and I'm showing them why what we do is rigorous and cool. Okay, and then my last tip has to do with how you end your talks. This slide is fine as the second to last slide. Your last slide should be a picture of your central idea, and that is the slide you leave up for the Q&A. The central idea could be the main result. It could be a conceptual picture like this. It could be your model structure or your survey. Whatever it is you want the audience to leave with, the image you want them to leave with, should be this, not this. SMDM, our oral presentations are 10 minutes long with 5 minutes Q&A. Why would you show this for 1/3 of your time on the podium? Promote your idea. It's going to help people ask better questions during the Q&A. If someone walks in late, this will help orient them to what the heck just went on. And then third, I don't have evidence for this, but I think it improves retention. I think this lasting image is I don't know if that's true or not, but it couldn't, it's better than this. All right, thank you.
So everybody was really good on time except for Laura.
Which is never the case. I am so good about staying on time usually.
So we actually have plenty of time for questions. So I want to especially invite any trainees in the audience to come up and ask questions to our esteemed panel, especially if you're on the job market or have questions about that. So
While you guys formulate your... We have to turn this on. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
While you formulate your questions and come up, you guys should come up. I'll just say, Ankur had a great point about giving your talks multiple times. I will say, and I can't believe I'm saying this out loud and on video, because I'm giving you all of my tricks, change the title, right? Because it looks like you're giving different talks, even though it's the same talk. So I gave a talk about financial incentives. The first one was called Bribes and Prejudice. The second one was called Persuasion. And the third one was called Sense and Sensibility. Same talk every time. Different titles. So someone looks at your CV and you're like, oh my God, they have so much content. I do not.
That's great.
There we go. Holly Witterman from Université Laval. Thank you so much. So, Université Laval, I'm the only person in my group who speaks English natively. So this is often something that I have to work with my trainees, is about giving a talk in your non-native language, right? Which creates an additional level of stress. And I know it because I live and work in French, and feel free to come and ask me about the time I made a very lewd joke in my talk by accident by using French slang wrong. So I would love any thoughts from the panel about how do we help trainees who are dealing with something that's very real. And it's very real, and they know, and I know, because I've given talks in my second and third languages, that you come across as less intelligent when you're speaking in a language in which you're not quite as fluent. And unfortunately, they know that some people are going to think that. And how do we address that?
I think it's an important thing for us as audience members to keep in mind first and foremost. And if you're giving us, let's say, I only have one advice for like, if you're giving a seminar where there's interactive Q&A as opposed to like, or even during this, or even, no, it works for our sessions too. If someone asks you a question and you can't understand what they're getting at, just ask them to ask it again in a different way, because it's probably not just you who doesn't understand what they're saying. There are probably multiple people in the room who also don't understand what the question was and don't feel bad about making them restate it. Or you could even try to like, are you asking this? But I would rather have them restate it. Like, but during the time, I have less advice for during.
I would say, I think, as speakers, to acknowledge this, we all talk too fast. You need to slow down. It's really difficult if you've ever been to another country and you know a little bit of the language. It's really difficult to keep up. And I think we all talk too quickly. And I think that's one thing we as speakers can do. And then as audience members asking questions, stop talking so quickly.
I mean, I don't have really good personal experience to speak to the question, and so I worry that I would give bad advice. So, and I just want to be completely frank. But I would think that, you know, when we think about a really good speaker, oftentimes it's almost like borderline edutainment, right? Like people are being, entertained at the same time as they're being educated about the work, and that's a really hard thing to do outside of your native language. And I would say that, you know, just set the bar as high as you can go with what you're trying to do, right? Like with my first talk that I actually succeeded at, it was just, my job is to convey what I did and to convey my enthusiasm about what I did, and I'm not going to set the bar any higher than that. And that worked really well for me at that time. So, and, you know, telling jokes and, you know, being entertaining in a broader way is maybe a more advanced skill that's harder. But I'm sure you could pick it up even if you're not speaking in your native language. It just takes more time. That's the best I can do for you.
Thank you.
Hi there, Tran Doan. If my question is very confusing, it's because my first language is not English. My question is about rehearsing talks. I definitely see the value of it. Like my brain knows that. My heart just doesn't feel like doing it at all for several reasons. First of all, just time. It takes a lot of time. Second, just finding an audience that care enough about you. Like I'm a junior faculty, and so like having my faculty member, my clinician colleagues take half an hour of their time to listen to my talk that's not quite as good as it could get yet. And then the third thing is just, isn't it boring to just give the same talk like 3 and 4 and 5 times? I get it that it gets better, but I don't know. Just your opinion on this.
I think that practicing to yourself can be just as beneficial, or it gives you a different kind of benefit than practicing in front of other people. So I will practice a talk to myself in my hotel room or my office or my home and just talk it through a number of times. I mean, do it just to figure out how long the talk is likely to take. Obviously, I was off by exactly 1 minute today.
I was going to say, to your point about not having the time, find it. To the point about not finding the audience, Ankur and I, after we graduated, we formed a peer mentoring group, and we would meet monthly via Skype. And so I think you can find a network of people who are not at your institution to practice with, and that works really well. And also, if you offer that service to others, it's a service that everyone is doing for each other. That feels a little bit better. And then about it being boring, I think I'd rather be bored than give a bad talk. And so practicing makes you better. That's my goal, is to be the best speaker possible.
Yeah, and I'll say something about scripts and memorization. I obviously don't do it. I support it. I think it's good.
Oh, I don't do scripts. I never do a script.
Oh,
no,
okay.
no.
But you memorize
but
up here.
Okay.
Well,
and I don't memorize really anymore. I just kind of get a sense of how long something will take. But I get it. You know, I will practice in order to figure out what the right word choice is. What do I want to say? What do I want to not say? Right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the tangents I could take that maybe I want to avoid? But I've never done a script. I just want to be clear. I've never written down exactly what it is I want to say.
Different things can work for different people. The one thing I just with a script, like I think then it's about practicing the cadence, right? It's not like
right.
we did a Markov model, we did estimated cost. Like it's got to feel more natural, even if it's scripted, and that might take practice, whether it's up here or ideally with people, ideally with kind of, to use the war metaphor, with live fire. You know, go somewhere and let it come at you, so that the next time you do it, it's going to be better.
I know it's super cheesy, but just to follow up to that, do you guys like look at yourselves in the mirror as you give your talks?
I sometimes find that distracting, but like if a mirror happens to be there.
But posture is important. So
Yes.
I was at a teaching thing recently, and it was like a seminar-styled room, and someone was giving a talk while sitting down, and they were doing that. They were giving the talk. They were looking at their slides and giving the talk like this. And then I went up to her after. I'm like, "Did you notice you were blocking your mouth for the first half of the talk when you were nervous?" And then in the second half of the talk, she wasn't nervous and she was very open. And so it's like, use the space. Posture is important. I like to walk around when given the chance. You can't do it here, but in some rooms you can. I like to point at the screen and make it physical and wake people up. Yeah.
And you could do that in front of a mirror if you wanted.
Hey, I'm Zizi Sisi, a master's student at University of Cincinnati. So my question is, during your presentation, when you make an eye contact with your audience and you find your audience not really engaged, and sometimes like some creepy faces and like people playing with their phone, what do you do? And sometimes it creeps me out, like, oh my God, what's happening? And
I look for the people who are looking at me and look happy. I really do. I seek out those supportive looking faces, and sometimes those are people that I'm colleagues with or friends with, but I look for those faces. I really do. And I try not to take the fiddling with the phone and falling asleep personally, because you don't know what happened to that person last night. Maybe they got 2 hours of sleep, they're falling asleep. Maybe they're like responding to an urgent text from their kid. You don't know what's going on, so you can't take it personally.
I create that friendly face because sometimes I stack the audience and I make my friends come to my talk. And so, I mean, like, you know, when you're traveling and giving invited talks, and I think this is in the notes that you can download online, I also specifically ask somebody to take notes for me. So I invite somebody, ask them to take notes for me, so I don't have to stress out about doing that during the Q&A.
Right?
Hi, I'm Kelly Matula. I'm from the University of Michigan. This might be like too specific of a question, but I'm going to try and spin it in like a way that could be helpful to other people. As you can all tell, I, have some disabilities and I can't like give a talk standing up, so I sit down. So sometimes it's like hard to find a chair that I can like sit in while giving my talk, but also I'm visually impaired, and like Q&As, like something like this is great where like everybody just organizes themselves and someone else is calling on people, but I have to like doing the whole explanation of like, just like yell at me if you have a question, because I'm not gonna be able to see you if you raise your hand or whatever. Like, how do I like advice for how to kind of instantiate that stuff without having to do like the first minute of my talk being explanation of like, here's the reasons why my talk can't run in the traditional way. I don't know.
If you're going to, like, let's say another institution,
Yeah.
you could email your contact there and kind of have them let everybody know. I guess my question to you would be, I guess it takes a minute of your time in the beginning, but I hope you don't feel bad to have to describe that. Like if I was sitting through it, I would never feel like, oh, why did she say that? Like it'd make me relate. Not
I
relate
have
to you, but
noticed though, it
like
makes
you more.
people ask fewer questions if they have to interrupt you.
Yeah, I would just echo that sentiment that I wouldn't feel bashful or feel bad about saying why you're doing things in the way that you're doing it, and not apologize for it. And I'm sure that the audience will understand. And if they don't, well, then they're jerks.
I agree. And I think the best friend you can have in these situations is the administrator, not necessarily the faculty member who you invited you, but the admin. Who's in these situations to help set everything up for you. Do not undervalue this person. They can be very helpful.
Okay, there's someone who's been standing over here patiently
I don't know
waiting.
whether also the other thing to do potentially in that situation is to pause for questions like much more frequently throughout the talk. Like I give like really methodological talks and I tend to leave like 10 seconds at the end of each slide to just be like, right, let that sink in. Do you have any questions? Okay, cool, carry on. But that wasn't my question.
great.
No, I just planted that so that I could respond. No, so my first question was about like burden on people to listen to talks. So like, how do you kind of, especially if you're giving a lot of talks, if you're on the job market and you've prepared lots of job talks or something, how do you kind of, I guess, balance giving a talk in person to people and giving a talk like in your office to yourself? And how do you balance like burdening your like friends or your colleagues in terms of talk preparation?
I mean, we're biasing that we're all academics. Education is part of our job, and so we do it. I consider that as part of education and mentoring, and I'm paid in part to do that.
And is the burden we're talking about just like a burden in asking your friends and relatives and other faculty member to listen to you?
Yeah, practice burden. Like I often feel very like awkward, like going to people and being like, can you please help me? Like, can you please listen to this talk again? Or like something like that.
No, I think I ask the people I'm like friends with first, right? And then you build your way up towards your enemies. Like that's like the job talk. And then they'll do it for you, and it's a culture thing, and it's like it could be formal or informal. Like it's just a group of, like when our peer mentoring was totally informal, and we just knew we were there for each other, and we're all going to benefit in the long run.
Yeah, I just wouldn't be shy about asking, and if people don't want to do it, they'll say no, and I don't have time. No, that's okay.
Hi, my name is Tran Doan. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate at the University of Michigan. You mentioned earlier that in order to improve upon this talk, it's really important to kind of get critical feedback and be aware of those death traps ahead of time. And then also to be able to record yourself and look at yourself and, dealing with that uncomfortableness, dealing with that awkwardness of having to take that feedback and not taking it personally. So what are the self-care strategies that you use or self-talk in your mind to kind of talk you down from that uncomfortableness or awkwardness? Especially if I'm bombing, like while giving a presentation. I have a presentation in 2 weeks and trying to emotionally prepare for that.
It helps. These
and
peer
knowing
mentoring
that I'm
groups.
in a rocky spot. No, go ahead.
It helps seeing your friends bomb too, right? So everyone's first draft of the talk is always bad, and so and then it's kind of like writing papers and getting feedback. You build up that like rejection muscle, and then it's like, oh, there it is. It's expecting it. So it's kind of like the nerves when I was like, oh yeah, I expected those nerves, and there it is. Getting the feedback, same way. Even with my friends in the first round, I was like, oh yeah, there it is. Yep, it sucks. Yep, and then you got to like build yourself back up, and then you don't have to take all the advice either, right? You're the decision maker at the end.
Go ahead. I don't have anything to add either. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hello, I'm here, Tran Doan, here from the University of Missouri. I guess my problem is maybe a bit different than the problem of introvert. I'm definitely an extrovert person, and often I find myself not worried about looking brilliant because, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I often find myself, when I go through talks, I just turn. I don't have confidence. I have shameless hamminess, and that's what I have instead. And I'm concerned sometimes that while I personally am comfortable throughout the talk, other people are like, wow, this guy's a huge idiot. And I don't know.
Yeah, get some honest friends. So I have the same problem, obviously, of like overdoing the extra stuff. And so get some honest friends who are just like, no, that joke is not necessary. It's distracting. It's not working. Or they'll be like, no, it's fine. Like that could help.
Yeah, I think getting honest friends is really important. And if the problem is, I think that some people have a problem taking themselves too seriously, and other people have a problem of not taking themselves seriously enough. And so, if you're aware of the fact that you sit on one far end of that spectrum or the other, then maybe you could just kind of work towards dialing it back. I mean, it seems like you may have some self-awareness, but I'm not sure because I've never seen you talk. And maybe that you're making a mountain out of a molehill, but only your honest friends will tell you the truth. So yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll add that I do remember in grad school, I was practicing a talk and someone told me, you're just too casual. And I think there's no one right answer to how you give a talk. Everyone has a different style. You shouldn't necessarily try to be Laura or me or Ankur. You can find your own style, and that's okay. Some people are much more formal and serious. That's great. It doesn't matter how you perform. At the end of the day, you need to be effective. And if what you're doing is effective, and if people understand what you're trying to get across and they care about it, then I think you're doing fine.
Yeah, and I would just add, if the hamminess is distracting from the scientific point, then it's a problem. But if not, if your point is coming across well and clearly, then that's probably fine.
Hi, Sarah Monroe, University of British Columbia. I have two questions for the panel. First is around webinars, giving online talks where your audience is all online. I know you're cringing at that.
So awkward.
Yeah. And then the second one, what tips you might have to tailor your approach for that. And then the second is around knowing your audience and market research. So you mentioned, Ankur, about, you start with your friends and then move to your enemies. What if your audience is full of your enemies? People who don't necessarily buy into your work.
I think that was part of my talk, is that if they, to your second point, if you think they're not going to buy in, start off by saying, I know you're skeptical, and maybe you need to reverse it and start off by saying, tell me what it is that you are worried about, right? And then try to address that on the fly. You may try to do that in advance because you could talk to the organizer. It's very important, I think, about knowing your audience to ask the organizer who's in the room, what is their background, right? So you can speak to that in your talk or revise your talk appropriately. For the webinar, I do think jokes actually work less well in the webinar because you don't get that feedback about whether they're laughing or not. And so I would try not to do that.
Yeah, market research is a brilliant term. So ask your friend, probably like the same level as you at that institution, who do I need to look out for? And they'd be like, oh, this person, they hate deterministic analyses. They're going to ask you and they hate it. It's market research or gossip, or I don't know what you call it, but it helps to know in advance.
I actually also have called people out in my talks. And so people I know who are at the institution, I've put like a tweet up or put a picture of their paper up. And so if you think someone hates what you do and they've written a paper saying what you do is garbage, I'll straight up put that in my talk and say, Joe said it was garbage, but I'm here to convince you otherwise.
I'll just add that that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So we probably have time for 2 more questions. So
Okay, I'll try to be brief. I just want to respond to Kelly and Holly's questions in part, which is it's okay to own your space, and if there's something you need, it's okay to get that. So maybe you have an undergraduate assigned to find out who's trying to ask a question to stop you, and that undergrad's going to be delighted to have the opportunity to serve in that role for you. And then to Holly's question, but a lot of them, like, go watch talks and see what works, right? Like, see when I see a talk of someone who's not a native English speaker, I can see what works and what doesn't, and then just try to find someone who's giving the kind of talk you want to give and then emulate that. But my question's about speaking to an academic audience versus a non-academic audience, and how to, like, what are the key things to really focus on when talking either to the press or to funders?
I know the press love metaphors. So if you could take your complicated idea and turn it into a metaphor that's accessible to them, and academics do too, but it's probably more important with the lay.
They also like stories. So any story that can distill a point is a good way to talk to the press, so long as it's accurately reflecting your research point.
I think with respect to the press, every university has a communications office, and that person will work with you to craft your story. I worked with mine to come up with my passion statement, to edit my profile that I put online, and to review some of these things to make sure that they're accessible. I once got a grant, and they sent me a series of questions, which I answered, and then sent it to my communications office to edit and say, how can I make this better? That was helpful. About talking to funders, I actually just did this last week. You need to use layman's examples, and you need to tell a lot of stories about the patients. And I think maybe you're thinking, well, I do work on microsimulation modeling, so what stories am I going to tell? If you find Angie Fagerland, she has a fantastic story about one of her grants from the American Heart Association, where it's about, and Rebecca Delaney is working in this work as well, families who are dealing with reproductive decision-making around kids with coronary heart disease? No, congenital heart disease, thank you. And she had another person working on a big data project, and they created these videos and all these stories, and she actually shared that with a big data researcher, and he was just like, oh my God, can I share this with my team? It's important for all of us to understand the stories, the medical history behind the work that we're doing.
Hi, Tanya Bentley from Los Angeles. Thank you guys so much for doing this. I think this is incredibly valuable, and I'm going to actually talk to people for next year about maybe making something like this part of one of the main sessions, like a workshop. Just looking around the room, I see incredibly senior researchers here who are some of the best public speakers I've ever met. So if they're here, then it means that it's something that's of value to I think everyone here. And I just have comments. So I have a talk in about a week and a half to a new audience to me. It's going to be an audience full of physicians, and I'm not a physician. So I'm terrified, and I'm practicing like crazy. And actually, this has reminded me of some tips that I've heard before that didn't come up today. So I thought I'd share them, and I'm now going to do them myself because I remembered. One is to, if you have pets, practice in front of your pets. They're the best listeners, especially if you have treats, if it's for a dog. I remember the person who said they practiced in front of their hamsters, like over and over and over again. And then another person suggested to practice being nervous in order to know the feeling of being nervous, to practice after you've done a set of 20 burpees. So that your heart is racing and you are used to that feeling. And then to the comment about looking in the mirror, I actually do sometimes do that, although I have to admit I hadn't until now for this next talk, so I'm going to do it, because it just adds to the incredible discomfort of practicing, and so it brings it a little more close to how uncomfortable I'll be during the talk. So those are my thoughts. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add is that in addition to the document we've put online and all our slides, which are going to be online, we also created a Wakelet, which is a sort of Pinterest for things on the internet that we tweeted out from the Social MDM account, which has a lot of different public speaking resources and tips and links to those. So you can check that out.
Any other final comments from our panel?
It's a learning process, and I feel like I'm still learning how to do public speaking, so I'm honored to be here. But I'm not sure how deserving I really am, So, like you said, there are many good public speakers who are in the audience today who easily could be up here as well, sharing their tips. So talk to people about what they do for public speaking, and I think sharing our failures and our successes together can help us all get better.
I think one last tip would be, if you don't have so many words on your slides, people can't tell that you're off script. Please get the words off of your slides.
Images, not words, right? And then the other thing is, I've seen people grow in this. You can learn it. You just have to commit time and energy to it.
Well, this was so wonderful and so helpful. So as a trainee, I learned so much from you all. So I just want to personally thank you for participating in this. And I'd like if everybody could give our panelists another round of applause. Thank you so much.
You guys too.
And also, if you're like me and you were afraid to ask a question, please approach them in the hallway because they are all very approachable people. Thank you so much for coming to our workshop today.